Successful marriage boils down to two words. Yes, dear.
Yes, dear.
And I've said them many times that we've been married 58 years as of last week. So,
Oh, congratulations.
yes, many, many years ago, I met the most beautiful girl in the world, and she's still got great gams. Well, it's a pleasure to be back here, really, because I feel, although we've only been here once, I feel somewhat of a kinship. When we first walked in, we were greeted. We went to the back of the building where the kitchen was, and in my recollection of spiritualism, that's where all the action was, in the kitchen. You mentioned I'm a fourth generation spiritualist, and thank you for the introduction, very kind. It takes me back, it really does, walking into this building, because I come from a family of spiritualists, two families of spiritualists. And I come from the very first purpose-built spiritualist church in Canada, which was opened in 1918. We had 3 services a day. We had a Lyceum service in the morning. Average attendance somewhere between 75 and 100. We had a healing service in the afternoon. Average attendance somewhere between 75 and 100. And we had a main divine service in the evening. Attendance somewhere between 75 and 100. And in between the healing service and the divine service, there was a meal. I mean a meal. Our ladies got together, full roast dinner every Sunday, whether it was a ham, a pork roast, or a roast of beef. It was a community, a sense of community. It was a community of families. That's what spiritualism was. And I'm so pleased to see families here today. Because if you look around within our spiritualist community, something's gone wrong. Something's gone dramatically wrong. We become a religion of adults. Think about that. When you count yourself among a spiritualist community, is this where we want to be? Because we're a dying breed if that's going to be we're going to maintain that. We're not going to grow. Who says we need to grow? I sometimes think spiritualism has served its purpose because it's the culmination of a long 100 years of religious revolution that started off with Martin Luther and the separation of the Catholic and Protestant churches, and the evolution from the church being the total salvation of our souls to the point where we are the masters of our own souls. We control the destiny. And if I could have one message for these 3 young people here today, you're in control. You control where you're going to go in this world. The decisions you make, the choices you make, are yours and yours alone. Not those who are trying to influence you, or try to get you to go one pathway or another, but the pathway that your own little mind says, this is right or this is wrong. Which way am I going to go? That's up to you. And I'm so pleased that we have some children here today. Young ones, I don't call them children because their minds are much deeper and broader than we could imagine. But think about it. Think about the loss of young ones in our religious community. Because that's where we came from. That's our roots. We wouldn't be sitting in this building if it weren't for children. Specifically, 2 young ladies, much the same age as these 2 young girls over here. And a young man who was a little older than this young fellow sitting at the back here. We wouldn't be sitting here without 2 young girls and 1 young man. Because it goes back to the roots of spiritualism. In that small village of Hydesville in 1831, or 1848, sorry. Got my dates mixed up. Where two young girls, not much different in age than these two, established communication with a spirit. The spirit of a fellow by the name of Charles B. Rosna, who had been murdered in the house they were living in 5 years previously. And for some reason or other, and I still can't come to grips with this, hung around there. His spirit hung around that house, bugging people who lived there. Knocking, banging things around, to the point where most people who lived in there moved out. They couldn't handle it. Until the Fox family moved in there with two young girls. There were three, actually. But on this particular night, there were two, Margareta and Catherine, aged 12 and 14. And they heard all these bangings. They'd been subject to it while they were living in the house. And one night they got a little extreme. And they said, let's have some fun with this. And these two young ladies were having fun with us downstairs. They got a curious mind. They weren't afraid of these knockings. And they eventually established a method of communicating with this fellow. Knock once for yes, two for no. And they found out who he was. They established communication. And the word spread like wildfire. It ran through the community, and everybody in the community showed up. And they started communicating with this fellow. The birth of modern spiritualism, as they call it. The events at Hydesville, in the evening of March 31st, 1848. And we all tend, as spiritualists, to think that was the start of it all. But it wasn't. Because you have to go back to the young boy. Well, a young boy who, a year previously to 1848, did something very special. I won't go into how this all happened, but this young fellow's name was Andrew Jackson Davis, who had heard the voices of spirit since he was a youngster. He just thought they were two friends. He did what he was told, listened to them, listened to their advice, talked with them from time to time. And then they asked him to do something special. Over the course of the years, when he turned 18, they said, we'd like you to do something special. We'd like you to visit with us to a different world. We'd like you to come and visit with us to our world, the world of spirit. And so, over the course of 15 months, he did what he was told. They told him, you sit in a room with people, and they dictated who the people would be. Throughout the course of the 15 months, there were 3 people that were with him every time he sat. There were 23 people that were assigned to be at different of these sessions. And over the course of the 15 months, a couple hundred people from off the street came in and witnessed what was going on. And what exactly was going on was they'd mesmerized this young fellow, put him into a trance condition. And during those trance conditions, he'd visit the spiritual universe and talked about what he saw there. Imagine that, 18 years old. And this guy was illiterate. This young boy had only attended school for a couple of months. He couldn't read hardly or write. But the words that came out of this young mouth were exotic, beyond description, as he described what this spiritual universe was like, and how it started, how it evolved, how that universe evolved scientifically, how solar systems evolved within the universe, how our planetary system evolved, how Earth evolved, and how life evolved on Earth, up to including vegetation, animals, people, human beings. And then he took it one step further. When we die on this earth, that's not the end of it all. We move on to a different dimension, to continue a journey that we know very little about, but we know it's there. And in this work, it was all transcribed into a book called The Principles of Nature, Her Divine Revelations, and a Voice to Mankind. And in this work, he described something would happen. that eventually we who live in this dimension will establish communication with those who live in another dimension called the spiritual universe. And just about a year later, on that evening of March 31st, 1848, he heard one of those voices in his ear, and it said, "Behold, brother, the good work has begun. A living demonstration is born." That exact same night, Hydesville happened. So we've got two young girls here who established communication with the spiritual universe, but we have this critical precursor that told us what it was all about and why. Without it, what we do in our churches would mean nothing. Why would we establish communication with somebody that lives somewhere else? Why? Well, he told us why in that book. Because we're on an eternal path of progression. He established natural law for us, that everything in existence is in a constant state of motion. Everything. We know that. Scientifically, we know that. Everything, protons, neutrons, chromosomes, everything's moving around. And through that movement, it's progressing to a different form. The law of eternal progression. Everything's progressing, moving from a lower form of existence to a higher form of existence. Nothing so lowest in its form that it's not the highest form of something else, or nothing so high in its form that it's not the lowest form of something else. We're continually moving on. So if you're dissatisfied with your function today, think about that. You can change it. You have this progress that you can make through the law of cause and effect. Everything has a cause, and there's an effect to it. It's a butterfly principle. You know, a butterfly beats its wings in Winter Park, and somewhere in Japan there's an earthquake. Law of cause and effect. But it also leads to one other law. And I want to discuss this natural law because I think it's very important. I want to talk about the law of attraction. Because what we do in our life is we're attracted to other people. We're attracted to things that make us comfortable. Even when we come into church, when we sit down in the coffee room, people sit in groups where they're most comfortable. When they sit in church, they sit in groups that are most comfortable. Birds of a feather flock together. Natural. But it leads to something. There's a purpose. It's called the law of reproduction. Everything reproduces itself in this world. Everything. If we destroy something, grind it into dust, it'll emerge in some other form at some point in time. It's always reproducing itself. So what? Natural law, so what? Well, there's some guiding principles to that, because if you just take this one set of laws, which I call them primary laws, if you just take those, things can really get out of whack. They really can. Just like the components of the soul, love, will, and wisdom. If love and will act together without wisdom, we get ourselves in all sorts of trouble. And so it is with the laws of nature. We have some governing laws, things that keep things under an even keel. It's the law of eternal justice. And in my mind, that's what spiritualism is all about. Justice. That's how it evolved. It didn't evolve as a religion. It evolved as a movement, social activism. Justice denied one of us is justice denied all of us. That was the raison d'etre for spiritualism in the early days. If you wanted to complain about something, or protest, call a spiritualist. They'd walk with a sandwich board down Fifth Avenue, protesting against anything. But in those days, it was against slavery. It was against child labor practices. It was for women's rights. That's the roots of spiritualism. The law of eternal justice. But there's other factors that come into play here. There's the law of eternal truth. There are truths in this world. They're not what we make them. We'll dictate facts. We'll present you facts. But facts are not necessarily truths. They have to be proven to be truths. They have to be repetitive. Facts evolve into truths. Facts are temporary. They're not permanent. But truth is immortal. And it's forever. And the last governing law, which is my favorite, and I don't think anybody can argue with it. You can argue about the other ones. Have an opinion on them. But you can't argue with that last governing law. The law of universal goodness. Not love. Goodness. That's what drives everything, that law of goodness. The essence of our spirit, goodness. That ability to live each day having the right thoughts, doing the right things, living the right thing, the right life, for no other reason that it's simply the right thing to do. Simple. Nothing complicated about spiritualism. It's just natural. It's explainable. You know, one of the things that's difficult to understand about spiritualism, because we've made it so, is it's so logical. It's not emotional. It does have an emotional side, particularly when you touch your mind with the spirit mind. But it's so logical. Everything must make sense. Your principles, scientifically proven. We haven't. We haven't scientifically proven anything. What we have done, though, is establish a body of evidence over the last 160 some odd years that said there's a very high probability of this. I often get a nice reaction when I say, what if we're wrong? Eh? Got two new people down here, I think. What if we're wrong? Use your gray cells, as Porro said, little gray matter, and figure it out for yourself. Look at the body of evidence that we have through this thing we call mediumship. It can be debated because it's an individualistic thing. It can't be demonstrated on television. It can only be demonstrated in person with one individual, a medium, establishing a link with a mind that lives in the spiritual universe that wants to talk to somebody living in this or sitting in this room. And that message, or the information the medium brings through, can only mean one thing to one person. It's personal. It's one person talking to another about information that only they should know. And if you don't get information from a medium that's irrefutable in your memory bank or in your mind, you know that this proves beyond a reasonable shadow of a doubt that the person that's trying to talk to you is actually who they say. It's not about living a better life, not about going on a cruise. It's about establishing a communication between a mind that lives somewhere else, that once loved you, or maybe not. Maybe wants to come back and apologize for the way they treated you. But that's what it's all about. Just communication. Nothing more, nothing less. To prove that at some point in time, we're going to be living up where they're living. Or down where they're living, or around where they're living. Nobody's ever proven where that spiritual universe is. I personally think it's a system of etheric densities, if you can visualize that. They're only penetrable from one level to another by pureness of one's thought, the goodness of one's thought. Who knows? Don't care. Someday I hope to find out, but I don't think I ever will. If we're looking for all the answers, I don't think we're going to find them over there, wherever there that is. I think we're going to find them right here. Because look around. Look at your life. Look at the friends you associate with. That law of attraction. And say to yourself, uh-oh, if I'm not happy with this, I better do something about it. Because I'll guarantee you this, from what we know that that young boy brought through to us, we'll be associated with exactly the same people when we get over there. And if you're not happy about that, now is the time to do something about it. It's a matter of personal choice. We're all born relatively the same. You know, we have physical DNA. I would argue that we also have spiritual DNA. That's a little bit of baggage that we're saddled with when we're born. But other than that, we're all born just about the same, in what I call a state of innocent ignorance, all in a level playing field, except with this other side element of baggage. And we're all influenced differently. We all have different social environments, different educational opportunities, different nurturing elements within our family structure. And over this time, we change. We become more individualistic. We develop opinions. It forms our psyche. And we become different. Law of attraction. Like attracts like. Are you happy with that? Because if you're not, better change it now, because you're going to have to work on it when you get to the other side. And I, for one, I'm not too sure about that. I'm reluctant to change, because I'm getting older, more crotchety in my ways. But I know that when I run into something that makes other people uncomfortable with, that I need to change. Because if it makes other people uncomfortable, if I'm going back to the right thoughts, the right deeds, and all that stuff, then it's making me feel some degree of discomfort. And I'm going to have to change and work on that. Nothing fancy about spiritualism. Really nothing. Nothing too complicated about it. We make it complicated. We spend too much time, and here I get some weird looks. We spend too much time trying to communicate with spirit. We spend too much emphasis on that because we're more concerned about us than others. Communicating with spirit is a very personal, individualistic, selfish thing. It's about us. And that's not what philosophy of spiritualism is about. It's about others. What can you do to help make other people's lives more meaningful? Not by telling them what you think, by demonstrating how you live. Because one thing we do as spiritualists, another thing I take great issue is, we spend too much time trying to convince other spiritualists that ours is the right way. Think about that for a bit. We spend too much time trying to convince other spiritualists that we have the right view of things. People have set up businesses doing that. The business of spiritualism. And you want the actual reason of why we're so few here? Why there's no families? Because we've lost the focus. It's become more about us than others. Go back to the last time that you really felt a sense of joy, or a sense of what I call bliss, that inner feeling of, oh, God, does that ever make you feel good? When's the last time you had that? Most likely, you can take it right back to the point when somebody said to you, gee, thanks very much what you did for me. I really appreciate you looking after my mother when she was in such dire straits and I couldn't be there. How does that make you feel? That inner sense that you just can't describe. You can't put a word to it. It's just a feeling. And if you listen, if you really listen to those voices from Spirit, if you go back and listen to the information and their emotion that they bring through. More importantly than I think, than the information in some instances, the emotion they bring through. And see how that makes you feel. That inner sense of joy, that inner sense of bliss, contentment. And take that and use it as a model for how you're going to live in the next life. Thank you.